In 1990, Sega of America began putting together a team that would be responsible for the creation and development of software properties that would be aimed at Western audiences. This division would go on to be called Sega Technical Institute and was headquartered in the United States. PlayStation 4 system designer Mark Cerny had been an employee at Sega at the time and played a huge role in the formation of this new division. The idea had been fairly simple. Most of the games coming out for the Genesis and Mega Drive in North America and Europe had been developed initially by Japanese teams for a Japanese market. Cerny and Sega of America wanted games that would have a broad appeal and scoop up potential new customers that perhaps the Japanese-made software didn't appeal to. With the new division created, its purpose defined, they set forth to create their very first game, Dick Tracy, for the Genesis and Master System. I hope you guys enjoy the games of Sega Technical Institute. With Dick Tracy proving to be a huge success at the box office in the summer of 1990, Sega scored the license to the IP and created their very own games on it. Released on the Genesis in January of 1991, this side-scrolling action game pits the titled hero against organized crime and is based on the comic book series of the same name. I like this one from the moment I played it. The visuals are fantastic, they're colorful and well animated, and every stage has cool little touches like being able to shoot up things in the background. And that was one of the more interesting things about its gameplay. Some stages had two planes of enemies you needed to worry about. The guys on your path could be taken down just like any other game, but sometimes you were attacked from the background, forcing you to draw your Tommy gun and spray bullets all over the place. Gameplay types didn't begin and end there, however. You also had stages where Tracy needed to use his fists and platforming skills to get where he needed to be. All in all, it was a great all-around experience, and had a challenge to it that made sure you didn't easily defeat it in a single night. It was a great start for the developer and one of my favorite games from them. There's a Sega Master System version of this game as well. In mid-1992, Sega Technical Institute's newest endeavor found its way on the Genesis, Kid Chameleon. This action platformer featured a great story about a virtual reality arcade that kidnapped kids, and your bid to rescue them. The gameplay consisted of the ability to gain powers thanks to various different mask types. Some turned you into sword-wielding samurai, while others gave you assist abilities like being able to break certain block types. The stage design was often labyrinthian in its complexity. You'd need to explore and find different ways to get around in them. The object was to capture the flag in the level and move on. There are tons of levels to play, and that actually ends up being one of the game's weakest points. Sega decided to skimp on a battery backup to save your progress, and with no password system in place, this is one hell of a difficult game to defeat start to finish. The music was created by a company called New Romantic Productions using the Gems driver, and it's nowhere near the level of quality of the rest of the presentation. It really is a shame, because had this game had a battery backup and a stronger soundtrack, it could have been one of the platform's best games. Instead, it's good, but most people will never invest the time to see the better powers and stages. Later in 1992, we received Greendog, the beached surfer dude. Despite being considered a Sega Technical Institute game by multiple sources, I've consulted the credits in the US manual, and it seems the majority of the work done was by a company called Interactive Designs. Sega published the title, so it's possible STI did some work somewhere that earned it being associated with the project, but I cannot find any of the core members of the Sega Technical Institute anywhere in its credits. This was a platformer starring a laid-back beach bum trying to break an Aztec curse that won't allow him to surf anymore. You guys know I'm not a fan of this game. The awful Gems tunes are in full effect here, trying like hell to recreate Calypso-style music and failing miserably. The art design is pretty rough too, with no interesting detail in the environment or the characters. Some of you will find the simple play mechanics enough to enjoy it, but on a system with numerous games of this type that look, sound, and play better, Greendog just wasn't anything special. With the first Sonic title finished and selling like hotcakes in the US and Europe, Mark Cerny convinced a disenchanted Yuji Naka and a few members of the first Sonic development team to come over to the US and join Sega Technical Institute in making Sonic 2. I'm sure all of you know this one quite well. Bigger, brighter, and with more to learn and master, Sonic 2 added the much-needed spin dash to the character's moveset, as well as introducing Tails, Sonic's faithful sidekick. It's one of Sega's best-selling pieces of software for the platform, and solidified Sonic's place among the most elite IPs in the industry. Not everything was perfect, however. A great schism was created during development between the US and Japanese teams due to cultural differences. Mark Cerny would leave Sega at the end of this game's completion, which prompted a split into two teams for Sega Technical Institute. In late 1993, the newly formed American division within Sega Technical Institute teamed up with a company called Polygames to release Sonic Spinball, a pinball-like game using the little blue blur as the ball. The mechanics are simple here. Use the flippers to keep Sonic in the play area until you obtain the Chaos Emerald for that stage. I was never a fan of this despite it being hugely popular at the time. I never cared for its sluggish gameplay or its awful soundtrack. I felt trapped and the stages just seemed to go on and on doing the same thing over and over. That lack of variety and my distaste for its presentation make this one of my least favorite entries into the series. Apparently I was in the minority, however, because it sold well, and I am often scolded by Sega fans for my dislike of it. As the new American division within Sega Technical Institute developed Sonic Spinball, the Japanese team led by Yuji Naka began development of Sonic 3. The original vision for this game was that it would be an overhead isometric 3D game that was powered by the Sega Virtual Processor. With the SVP lagging behind in development, the working prototype and idea was scrapped in favor of a traditional 2D design. Intent on making Sonic 3 different, the development team shot for much larger stages, new power-ups, and big increases in animation quality and music, and even Michael Jackson was brought on board to help. The project ballooned and began to consume a massive amount of resources within Sega. It became too large to make its expected release date, so the decision was made to split the game up. Sonic 3 was wrapped up for an early 1994 release, though Michael Jackson's involvement was uncredited due to his legal trouble. With Sonic 3 done and released, Yuji Naka and his team continued work on the second part of the game, now called Sonic & Knuckles. It continued the strides made in Sonic 3 with large levels and lots of power-ups, but this had been meant to be one game with Sonic 3. The developers floated the idea of finding a way to add this new game to the existing release, and Sega's hardware division had already been working on cartridge lock-on technology. This allowed the combination of two carts into one, giving you the full Sonic 3 and Knuckles experience as it had been intended. Sega had also made this new lock-on technology work with Sonic 2 as well, allowing you to play as Knuckles in that game. You could also attach any other game to the lock-on card and play a minigame called Blue Sphere. With Sonic and Knuckles completion, Yuji Naka and most of the Japanese Sega Technical Institute team departed, once again radically changing the structure of the division. With Sega Technical Institute now a single team again, they developed Comix Zone, a unique beat-em-up that was released in mid-1995. You take control of Sketch, a comic book creator that is sucked into the story of his own work. Now part of the comic book itself, you need to fight your way panel to panel, solving puzzles and collecting items along the way. The exceptional presentation here uses comic book style paneling and speech bubbles to make for a convincing environment. The usual sucktastic gems driver even manages to sound halfway decent. Gameplay is mostly tried and true beat-em-up mechanics of punches and kicks, but this is broken up frequently by light puzzle elements and items that allow you to tackle situations differently. The extreme difficulty is off-putting at times, particularly when you take mandatory damage for doing things that must be done to complete a level. Stick with it though. You'll adjust and eventually find the game here very much worth playing. Sega Technical Institute had been working on the Ooze, a game that had begun development in the earlier years of the division and constantly put off due to bigger projects. It was finished and released in late 1995. This is an overhead action game starring you as the Ooze, a former scientist that had been double-crossed and dumped into a vat of chemicals, creating your current form. Your job is to use your newfound powers and get revenge and stop the corporation from spreading a plague that will wipe out countless lives. There are puzzles to complete, items to collect, and a stage design that is set up very maze-like in manner. The gameplay allows you to attack in a few different ways, including a slime punch, a toxic spit, and even devouring your foes. You need to be careful though. Lose too much of your puddle of ooze and it's game over. There is a certain appeal to this game based on its concept and visual stylings alone, but the gameplay can be quite dull. Once past the initial novelty of its play mechanics, you are basically just wandering around its large levels trying to find your way out. The animation is quite impressive, though I can't say I care much at all for its gems-driven music. Still, I think many of you out there may find enough here that's worth playing, so be sure to give it a look if you've never played it before. With focus shifting to the Saturn in 1995, AM1 joined Sega Technical Institute to develop Die Hard Arcade. This 3D beat-em-up uses small arena-style venues for each of its stages, with its main objective being to clear out the enemies and move on. It has quick-time events in between each stage that you can pass or fail depending on which button you press. It's played mainly from a slightly elevated side-view perspective, often associated with 2.5D games of the era. I always appreciated this game's visual punch and two-player co-op. The move list has your normal punch and kick combos, but there are also some grappling and tons of weapons you can use. It started out as an arcade game on Sega's STV Titan hardware before being brought home. so it has that same great pick up and play appeal you expect. Why something similar wasn't done with Streets of Rage remains a mystery I'll never understand. Sonic Xtreme for the Saturn would be Sega Technical Institute's final work, though it was never officially released. This game is notorious not only for its failure to release a final product, but also its troubled development, which saw numerous setbacks due to people leaving the design team, inexperience, and petty bickering and squabbling. Sonic Xtreme saw different engines employed, different teams working on different parts of the design, and finally its cancellation in 1997. The turmoil ripped Sega Technical Institute apart, resulting in its dissolution and its remaining assets being absorbed back into Sega of America. The story of Sega Technical Institute is a cautionary tale of how not to run your business. The jealousy, dissent, and lack of a shared vision really hamstrung any chance Sega of America had at completing top-notch Saturn projects long-term. It was the antithesis of the way Nintendo operated, a tragic outcome that likely robbed us of many potential great games. This team start to finish was loaded with talented individuals that were capable of creating great software, and we saw the fruits of their labor numerous times proving that. I would have loved to have seen what these guys could have done with a Sega Saturn version of Kid Chameleon in Comix Zone, but alas, the chaos of Sonic Xtreme would make sure none of that happened. Sega's fall is filled with all kinds of little stories like these, and Sega Technical Institute was a small but important part of that narrative. Had things gone differently, we may have seen a decent 3D Sonic title early in the system's life, greatly helping the platform's overall appeal and success. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.